Hello everyone! Thank you for visiting our channel. Have you ever experienced such like stories? Michael and Emily have been married for 6 years. Emily was a manicurist by profession, while Michael worked as a landscape designer in a small company. A couple of years ago, they took out a mortgage for an apartment and gradually furnished it. The spouses had been trying to have a child for more than a year. Both of them were ready to take on the roles of parents, but nothing worked out, even though they had already passed the tests and everything was normal. They did not want to take any radical steps, so they simply did not lose hope that someday they would be lucky. Michael had a good friend named Joseph. Unlike his friend, the man was single and lived alone. He was not very lucky in relationships. At some point, he had already resigned himself to this state of affairs and stopped making an effort to meet someone. He was comfortable as he was. The friends met in middle school and had kept in touch ever since. In adulthood, they did not see each other very often, but when they did arrange to meet, their communication went as if no time had passed since they last spoke. One day, Joseph was walking through the park, his mind preoccupied with the repairs he had undertaken, so he hardly paid attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over a stone in the middle of the path, and this brought him out of his reverie. He looked around, trying to see if anyone had noticed his fall, and suddenly he noticed a familiar silhouette ahead. He approached a little closer and recognized her. It was Emily, his friend's wife. She was walking with some man. "Emmy, hi!" shouted Joseph, approaching even closer. "Oh!" The woman turned around. "Joseph, hi. I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already extended his hand to her companion to say hello. "Joseph, Ryan." At this moment, the woman tensed up a bit. She bit her lip, then laughed and said, "This is my brother. He came to visit us for the day, so I'm giving him a tour. We're actually in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Joseph replied that it was no problem, asked her to say hello to Michael, and then they said goodbye. He looked closely at Ryan's face. Something was bothering him about the whole situation. Whether it was Emily's reaction or her haste, he couldn't be sure. For a second, he even thought that there might be some non-familial connections between the two, but a phone call from a client distracted him and pushed the man's doubts away. In the midst of his work and daily routine, Joseph completely forgot about the situation in the park. He wasn't even surprised by the lack of a call from Michael. Usually, if someone passed on a greeting through mutual acquaintances, Michael would feel obligated to call and arrange to meet up. But his friend didn't appear for several months. One evening, Michael called him and happily announced that he was going to be a father soon. "You know, nothing special was happening before this, but now it's real news, and I decided to share it with you," he said. Joseph sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long they had been trying for a baby. At the end of the year, in winter, Michael even invited him to the hospital for the baby's birth. Afterward, they sat for a bit and celebrated the event. Later, a lull set in. The couple was completely immersed in caring for their child. The entire world revolved only around the baby. Periodically, they corresponded with Michael, but mainly he was headfirst in work, trying to provide his family with everything they needed. They hadn't seen each other for over a year. And one day, on a day off, Joseph happened to be passing through the area where his friend lived. He needed to pick up a package at a pickup point that was located in their building. And by lucky chance, he ran into Michael on the street. Michael was out for a walk with the stroller. Joseph called out to his friend, but Michael gestured for him to keep quiet. The baby had fallen asleep. It turned out that his wife sent him and their son out for a walk while she wanted to relax and unwind. Their friends started chatting. Joseph looked at the little boy and asked if it was clear yet who the child resembled. More like his mom, he joked, adding that the child didn't seem to have inherited anything from him. Their friend didn't appreciate the joke. Suddenly, he remembered seeing his wife with a stranger who she introduced as her brother. This was shortly before the news of her pregnancy. "Forgive me if I am wrong, but have you never entertained the thought that the child might not be yours?" asked Joseph seriously. Michael looked at him incredulously. He laughed and asked why he would suddenly think that. His friend sighed and decided to tell him what he saw in the park with his wife. After that, Michael wasn't as cheerful anymore. Well, she certainly didn't pass on any greetings from you. She didn't even mention seeing you. And the brother? Ryan, you say? Emily definitely doesn't have any blood brothers, and I don't recall any among her cousins, he said thoughtfully. And she certainly didn't mention any relatives visiting her at the time. These news shook Michael. He had still been feeling euphoric about finally having an heir, and he had always thought that he and his wife had a good relationship. Now he had doubts about his wife's fidelity, and at a time when they had already been ready to give up, and she unexpectedly became pregnant. Then it had seemed like a miracle to Michael, but now everything was clouded with doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even if it was after so much time had passed. That evening, he awaited his wife's return more eagerly than ever before. He knew that a serious conversation was coming. While he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he replayed all the suspicious moments in his head, moments that he could have just ignored in the past. When their latest attempt to have a child didn't bring any results, he suddenly felt like his wife had cooled off to the idea altogether. She didn't say it out loud, but he could sense it in her gaze. Eventually, a certain coldness grew between them, but Michael attributed it to hormonal fluctuations. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and ask his wife's brothers, David and Dylan, about a certain man who came to their house when Emily wasn't there and claimed to be her brother. The husband disguised this strange question as if some man came to them when Emily wasn't there and claimed to be her brother. His fears were confirmed. There were no cousins or even distant relatives of such a man. When the man hung up, Emily had just returned home. When she finished attending to the baby, the man decided to start the conversation. He started from afar, mentioning Ryan, who had supposedly recently visited her. Michael decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Emily didn't look him in the eye, constantly diverting her gaze. When this man's name was mentioned, she seemed to tense up but tried not to show it. "Do you know him, dear?" her husband asked calmly. "Yes, he's a former colleague." "Why did he need something?" Emily said. "But he wanted to see his own child." The man decided to provoke her. Emily suddenly paled and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth as if she were a fish out of water. Michael decided to push her. "Sophie's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat on me, did you? It seems like it's time to do a paternity test." His words thundered for his wife. Then she tried to compose herself. "I suffered for so many hours to give you a son, and you treat me like this," she cried out. "Well, if this is really my child, why are you worried?" her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she was ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping child, she began yelling at her husband that he was trying to shirk his responsibility for the child like a coward. She threatened to leave and never let Michael see her again. Then, with tears in her eyes, she started packing her things. With the help of an examination, it was discovered that the child was not Michael's after all. After that, they divorced Emily with a scandal. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already taken on the role of a father and become attached to this little bundle of joy. Throughout this difficult period, Joseph was by Michael's side, supporting him. Emily went to her parents' house. By that time, she hadn't been in touch with her lover for a long time. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Ryan himself was not interested in this. He already had his own family, and Emily was not his concern. So in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. What do you think about this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And thank you for listening to the story until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and be sure to like this video, as it will help us promote the channel. All the best.